Good morning, everybody. It's Friday, December 15th, 5:27 a.m. Central Time. Grain markets are mixed this morning. Matt Bennett, you guys are having a big grain marketing shindig here in Nashville, first week in February. Tell us about this. How can the people find out more?
Yeah, so if they just go to agmarket.net, they can get the info. It's just right there front and center. Between you and Mackenzie coming, we're excited about just doing a show. People kind of get a look behind how
We're
things
going
are
to do a
put
live
together.
podcast taping, is what we're going to do.
Absolutely. There you go. And so, we're gonna have some fun with that. Of course, we've got Dave Hightower's been there before. You know Dave well. He's
Hmm.
obviously a fantastic speaker. And then, of course, Dan Bozzi is right there in that same category. I think those two guys are kind of two of the titans, in my opinion, of this business over the last 20 years, but plus years. But Randy Dowdy's coming to give us a little different flavor, which we've certainly excited about that. And, of course, Eric Snodgrass. So we've got in-house people that are fantastic as well, but those are the ones that are not JSA or Ag Market. Pretty excited about it. Right there, like a mile north of Tootsie's. So I mean, where you're staying is going to be right in the heart of everything. So if you come to Nashville and don't attend any of our meetings, I won't tell your wife. But I highly recommend you should come listen to some of the speakers we've got.
We're all going to be there, guys. Check it out. Mackenzie, we've got some Brazilian weather stuff to start off with today.
Key Brazilian soybean areas will remain mostly dry through the weekend. Abnormally warm temperatures and a lack of rain will result in further crop stress. Rain is slated to return by Tuesday next week. Central and northern areas are anticipated to see the best amounts through Christmas. The extended GFS introduces additional rainfall for some areas through the year end, but is likely unreliable.
They're still pretty dry in Brazil, as I understand, Matt. I mean, if you look at any of the soil moisture maps or the precip versus normal, everything's been below normal. But the market doesn't act like it. The market, you look at a soybean chart, they've just been sideways. Like it's not trading like a drought market, like not by any stretch.
Yeah, and I don't know whether it was Eric that I saw this or where I saw it, but I saw 52% of the Brazilian soybean growing areas have had less than half the rainfall to date so far in their growing season.
Yeah.
That's an incredible stat. And so obviously soybeans are made later in the year, but I mean, you got to have freaking pods to fill. So this is a situation for sure to keep an eye on. With that being said, if they turn off the last map that she showed, good Lord. I mean, if you end up with that kind of rainfall distribution and totals in the central to north part, that's the areas that need it the worst. And so, you know, um, I agree with you. I don't know that we've totally paid enough attention to it. At the same time, I think the market has gotten to the point where feel like people are crying wolf, that we're not going to raise a crop. And then all of a sudden you end up, in the US with pretty rough conditions this last year, and respectable yields. And so I think a lot of folks are just slow to buy in. I mean, I think if you're significantly, if you're just as dry as we are today, whenever the calendar turns, I think that it will break out of that range.
The weather forecast is if these rains hit as advertised, it's not that bad because
Yeah.
southern Brazil's been too wet and they're not going to be super wet there. And you're going to catch the rains where you need them. This is supposed to start like Tuesday, Wednesday next week. Reuters ran a story yesterday about farmers facing a seed shortage because of replant. I don't know how widespread that is. I'm sure there's some of it, but I feel like a lot of the data is anecdotal, just like when we hear things about the crop and the crop problems in the United States. Like you've got to be careful what you pay attention to because the market again is just sideways. We've been back and forth in the same range since July, and that's in July we didn't know we were going to have a Brazil weather issue or dry conditions, but here we are. So I don't know. Price action isn't great. It doesn't act like a drought market, I guess.
No.
Ethanol producers are anticipating a victory with sustainable aviation fuel credits. The Biden administration is expected to approve the GREET model for use by companies looking to receive SAF tax credits. The model would allow ethanol-based SAF to qualify for tax credits. The administration, however, is expected to announce that it will update the GREET methodology by March 1st. It's unclear how the modification will impact the use of corn-based ethanol, although the administration is expected to tighten regulations around SAF feedstocks.
This isn't official yet, but Reuters is typically excellent with their reporting, and I would imagine that this is true. So this is a big win for ethanol. We're going to need it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the ethanol industry, obviously is mature to say the least. And so, with that being the case, I don't see extreme growth. I don't see any growth actually without something like this kind of entering the mix. We've dabbled with, 12%, 15%. I mean, politically, we can't ever seem to get something like that to occur. But you come in here and you ask these airlines to be net neutral, carbon neutral, whatever it is by
Yeah.
2050. There's no question they're going to have cleaner burning fuel. SAF enters the discussion, where I believe in 22 we actually produced 80 million gallons. And so it's an industry that has actually been trying to build out. It's just not quite as far along in its it's still in its infancy. And so it's not as far along as renewable, for instance, but I think that the growth potential is significantly larger than renewable, the way that I look at the usage as far as gallons, because I think the airline industry last year just in the US was 1,300 million gallons. So that's an incredible amount of fuel that we could end up having to put ethanol into the mix.
We had a story a day or two ago. GE Aerospace is experimenting a lot with SAF. Mackenzie, what was the stat? Like they run like 4 out of every 5 jet airplanes.
Three out of every 4 commercial jet engines here in the U.S.
This is happening. It's absolutely happening. It's going to take a while, I think.
Electric vehicle inventories are record high. Inventories on U.S. dealer lots are currently double what they were a year ago, with a 114-day supply on hand. Consumers have steered away from EVs due to their expensive cost and poor charging infrastructure. Ford announced this week that it will be reducing production of its signature EV pickup by half next year. GM is also planning to postpone production of some of its new EVs. A group of U.S. auto dealers sent a letter to President Biden last month requesting the administration reduce its EV mandates because of the large inventories.
So you see some of this stuff, and absolutely, I think the peak enthusiasm in this cycle for EVs occurred like post-COVID, but we're still selling more EVs. There's going to be more EV sales in 2023 than there have ever been. So even though the inventories are up, and keep in mind, we had so much goofy stuff with COVID and supply chains the last few years. Yeah, inventories are up. Okay. When you look at the top 5 selling cars in the United States, there is still very much something women like about a pickup man. But the Tesla Model Y is the 5th best-selling car in the United States this year. Isn't that crazy?
It is crazy. The thing about the pickup, one of my buddies actually bought a Ford Lightning. This is in no way trying to say anything bad. Interesting though, he didn't enjoy it, didn't like his truck. I told this story actually at a presentation this week, but the guy bought it for upwards of 90 grand, I believe, is what he told me. He wanted to trade it back in, and dealership offered him around 60, I believe. And so one of the guys in the crowd said, you know what, actually, I've got a Ford Lightning. I love my truck. And he wasn't defiant. He was just kind of, he was just having a conversation. And I said, absolutely. I said, do you do any work with it? Because this guy was like trying to haul stuff, and
Yeah.
it's not for that, I mean, it's to say I'm driving an electric pickup at this point. I mean, is that industry going to evolve? Absolutely. But, Tesla's been, in my opinion, at the forefront as far as electric vehicles are concerned. And I think as this industry tries to grow, it's certainly going to see some growing pains. And I think some of this has maybe not been up to snuff, if you will. Again, I'm not throwing any shade at Ford Light. I think that it's great for some people and they love it. It's just a matter of what are you going to do with it? Tesla's
cost structure is better than everybody else's, and they've been able to sell them cheaper. And that's why they're winning the race here. They get a ton of government money too. Tesla does subsidies because of the way that they do things. But this is, it's just like the SAF thing is happening, the EV thing is happening too. And because the EV thing is happening, we need the SAF thing to happen. So it's all kind of moves together, I guess.
Rain moved over Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas this morning. Amounts over the last 72 hours totaled up to 2.5 inches in the Texas Panhandle and areas further north. The rains are much needed as many of these areas remain drought-stricken to some degree. Kansas rated the state's winter wheat crop at 39% good to excellent earlier this week in its final crop progress report of the year.
These are still some droutish areas. That panhandle area is kind of hit or miss in terms of whether or not they're still in a drought area. Matt, the market, like the wheat market in my experience, does not care about weather at all almost this time of year.
No, not this time of year. The thing is, it's wintertime. Obviously, everything can change very rapidly with one big storm system rolling through. But as I told you before we got in here this morning, I've been out quite a bit over the last 2 weeks. Every place that I've been has talked about how dry they are.
Yeah.
There's a lot of fear about going into the winter with how dry the situation is. And, what if we come in here this spring with zero subsoil moisture? So I was in Iowa this week. 2 different places about 4 hours apart. And I'll tell you that at both meetings, it was something we talked about significantly afterwards, that they're drier than what they were at this time last year. And it's no secret that last year, the Western Corn Belt was freaking dry as can be. So I don't know. I think that dryness is something to certainly keep an eye on, but at the same time, I think that it could provide opportunity for us later on to latch on to a little bit more profit margin. I just don't want to have our hands in our pockets just because we're dry at this time of year. We're a long way from the heart of the crop.
Yeah, absolutely. Interest rates falling on their face.
So mortgage rates have declined for 7 consecutive weeks. The average 30-year mortgage rate fell to 6.95% this week, down from 7.03% last week, and its lowest level since August. A year ago, the average 30-year fixed rate was 6.3%. Rates peaked back in October at 7.8%. With the Fed forecasting rate cuts this coming year, housing experts are projecting mortgage rates to fall near or even below 6%. Since financing rates soared last summer, home sales have slowed to their lowest level in 2 decades.
These treasury yields have fallen apart. I mean, you look at the 30-year, this is incredible. First of all, it's incredible volatility in interest rates, but to go from almost 5.2% down to 4 even in the course of like weeks in the 30-year treasury, I mean, that's crazy. So mortgage rates are coming down, borrowing rates are coming down. Let me tell you something, guys. You look more at the CPI data, you look more at what the Fed has said. The doomers and recessionists, they lost this round. They're done. They're done. You look at CPI, and this is some super interesting stuff. The one component that is keeping inflation elevated is shelter, which is like rents and stuff like that. But everybody who knows more about this than I do will say that the shelter data lags very much so. The government data says that rents are like 70% of the total increase in CPI, and that they're up 7%. But the private sector data says that rents are only up 1 to 2%. So if they use the private sector data for rents, we actually would have had deflation the last 2 months. So the Fed, I don't know if there was ever going to be a landing. Everybody's going to argue about this forever. But I mean, I don't know if I can say there's a recession here given what's going on.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, this is certainly music to a lot of folks' ears to see interest rates backing off, mortgage rates, if you will. But I'll tell you one place rent's not cheap, Joe, and that's down there by you. I've got a daughter that's going to go to school close to Nashville. We were trying to find an apartment, and literally, it's hard to find a 1 to 2 bedroom apartment for less than $1,800.
Yeah, no, it's insane.
Unbelievable what it costs down there. But I would say mortgage rates. It's a fantastic development, because while we made a lot of money as a ag sector in 21, 22, it's no secret that 23 there wasn't a whole lot of cash made by people. I mean, liquidity, I think, maybe tightened down just a shade. Corn was a definite struggle for a lot of people. And so I think people were very concerned about what kind of money they were going to have to borrow against here this next year.
I just wonder, so the rates are already starting to drop. I wonder what sort of impact this has on things like residential real estate, farmland. None of those things really came down very much when the rates went up. So what do they do? What do they do now with the rates going lower?
That's a really tough question. I mean, the farmland hasn't slowed down one bit.
No.
I mean, it's unbelievable. Okay, so in our part of the world, we had 400 and some acres. I think 480 acres sell here a couple weeks ago. 21.5, I believe, was the average. And people said, well, it's 1031 money. And it was 1031 money. But heck, Joe, every auction I've been to has a second bidder out. I don't know who the second bidder out was. And I'm assuming there was more than just 2 guys going at it. So bottom line is there's some money floating around, significant money floating around still. And I got to think most of these huge number type sales are not financed ground. So
well, people are running into the stock market. People are running into precious metals. They're going to run into real estate too. I mean, there's a lot of cash on the sidelines, and now the rates are down. I mean, I wonder if you could get a reinflation type deal because of this. You just like if they cut, like people think they're going to cut,
I'm thinking that you could. The other thing I'll say about farm ground, Joe, like, so for instance, let's say you buy ground for, let's say 21.5, you know, even with the way that this market's acting, can you get the kind of rate of return that you can get guaranteed in other parts of the market with farm ground?
No, not
Obviously,
not with
not
that in a
even
vacuum.
close.
But whoever's buying that, that's not their first piece of farm ground.
I
So
agree. I
that
agree. And if it's
that's why it
1031
works.
money,
Yeah.
they're getting away from taxes, right?
Yeah.
And so that has to factor in. But if you're not doing it on 1031, holy smokes, you could throw that in a money market and get what, $1,200 an acre for and
Yeah.
you're not going to rent it for that. I mean,
I'd still take the ground over the government piece
I
of paper, but
personally I would too.
it doesn't pencil though. No, not
No.
in a vacuum. It doesn't. All right, export sales.
U.S. corn, U.S. corn export sales improved last week. Net corn sales of 56 million bushels were up 10% from the previous week, but down 12% from the prior 4-week average. Mexico was the largest buyer for the week. Net soybean sales of 40 million bushels were down 23% from the previous week and 46% from the prior 4-week average. China was the largest soybean buyer. Fueled by recent flash sales, net wheat sales were strong last week, totaling 1.5 million metric tons. The print was a marketing year high and up noticeably from the previous week and from the prior 4-week average. China was the largest wheat buyer for the week.
I don't say this very often, but SRW Wheat is the star of the show.
And everyone says, I'm not just going to say everyone. Several people said China's done buying wheat. I was asked that several times here over the last week or so. China's done buying wheat, right? I'm like, boy, I don't know. If they said they are, I don't know that I would say that I believe them. I mean, that's what I'd say too if I was going to go buy something of substantial value, because what's going to happen whenever China says they're done buying something? What's price action going to look like? Well, it's not good. And so
the price action could have been better though. I mean, given
I agree.
This is so we're to a point now where all wheat sales are finally above last year's pace, which
Right.
so now we're the 9th worst out of the last 10 years. But this is it's
But we're
a
not
good
the
development.
worst.
I hope they come and buy corn. I mean, that would be great. That's what we
I think they will.
We had another flash sale yesterday. U.S. exporters sold 400,000 metric tons of soybeans to unknown destinations for delivery during the current marketing year. The U.S. soybean export book is running 20% below the same period last year as of yesterday.
How many of these sales to unknown destination? How many of these get canceled, Matt?
I think that far too many of them do, and I think that's the reason why you see so many of these unknowns lately. Because who do you think it might be?
Well,
I think we all know who it is, and who it is saying, "Hold on a second, is Brazil going to get rain, or they're not going to get rain?" Because if they're going to get rain, we're going to cancel and replace.
It's contingent. It's contingent on the weather. That's what it is.
Absolutely, absolutely.
They did the same thing with corn last year. That was in the spring that China bought a bunch of corn and then they canceled it.
Yep,
it was a hedge.
Absolutely. Just a hedge of their risk. And that's what's going on, because as well as I do, Joe, that if Brazil's sub 150 or 163, those are two different price directions. I'm not saying it's vastly different, but there's no question in your mind or my mind that if they get below 150, you're going to see some very supportive action in this market. Whereas if they get quite a bit of rain over the next 2 to 3 weeks, and then you end up with a 162, 163, good luck getting a rally, and so China knows that. They're not dumb.
Yeah. What did cattle do yesterday?
They bounced back. Feeder cattle futures closed an average of $2.09 higher. Live cattle futures closed an average of 65 cents higher. Cash cattle trade hasn't really taken off this week, but hopefully we can hold it steady. If not, get a little bit higher. Choice box beef ended the day yesterday at $292.32. That was up 68 cents. Select ended the day at $258.26. That was down 95 cents.
Is the cattle bottom in, Matt?
I believe that it is. I talked to a guy.
Try to catch the falling knife, man.
Yeah. I talked to a guy in Iowa this week that his neighbor bought 7-weight cattle for $3 plus on feeders. And I'm like, what? After what we just went through. But I think that you're seeing maybe a few people get more I guess a little more confidence towards hopping back in this thing. I would be buying him there, and I'm not saying that he's dumb by any means. It's just I don't have any desire. I just feel like when you look at chart action, to me, I think that we probably at the low end. The other thing is, in my opinion, we've pulled these cattle forward, and I gotta think that sometime in 24 you're susceptible to cattle on feed going below 100%. Okay, so whenever that happens, I think the move to sub 100, from sub 100 to sub 90 is going to happen rapidly. And I'm talking like 2 cattle on feed reports, maybe 3. And when that happens, I think people are going to say, okay, it's on again.
So
I don't
the
know that you
most
go
the
to
most
$200,
bullish
but it's going to rally.
the most bullish reports are yet to come.
Absolutely.
Mackenzie,
Absolutely.
do
And
you
I
agree?
think they'll be some of the most
Yes.
bullish reports some of us have ever seen in our careers.
Yeah, this next report, there's some analysts that are expecting placements to be down 10%. Now, I'm not talking cattle on feed, but placements, and that's a big drop. So I think I think we could see it in the next 6 months easily, these incredibly bullish cattle on feed reports.
Right.
All right,
I'm not saying it's going to happen now. Okay. But I've been saying you get out to June, May, June, July timeframe. Now you're starting to teeter on this cattle on feed report could be a banger,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel strongly that'll happen sometime in 24. So I think some folks are saying, hey, I don't want to get super short in here because this thing could happen quicker. I don't want to get placed in a wrong situation. We all know that the funds puked. I do think the funds will be back in buying this thing probably over the next 2, 3, 4 months. And I think they're going to want to build a long position into those reports.
All right, perma bulls, have fun with that. I actually agree. I don't disagree with anything you guys said. Outside markets on Friday, guys. U.S. dollars up a little bit. Still a bid for risk assets here. Stocks are up. S&P's up 13. The Dow's up 100. Bonds up a little bit. Crude oil is trading up 34 cents, 71.92. Everybody have a great weekend. We'll talk to you on Monday.